Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. We are here to talk about Project Zero Maiden of Black Water today. This is a game that I wasn't sure I'd ever get a chance to talk about on this channel. It got released on the Wii U before I started the channel, and with the Wii U being the commercial failure that it was, there was an increasing risk that I was never going to be able to play it again. As the years went by and all the other Wii U console titles got ported to Switch, I was left there wondering what's happening with Project Zero. Is it going to be a lost game? I don't actually have a Wii U anymore, so I wasn't able to play it again myself. But, good news, it is off the console now. It has escaped. It is one of the last few exclusives to the console to get a port to other platforms. I believe we're only waiting on Xenoblade Chronicles X and the Star Fox one now, in terms of the big releases on Wii U. And we can kind of take or leave the Star Fox one, I guess. So, it really is only Xenoblade Chronicles X left to come. But anyway, we're here to talk about Project Zero Maiden of Black Water, which is one of my favourite games of all time. I have reviewed it on digitallydownloaded.net, both the Wii U original and this new release. You can check that out now. And I have given it a 5 out of 5 star rating because I really do love this game. And time has been good to it, so I enjoyed it a lot on the Wii U. I've enjoyed replaying it even more. I'm not here to talk about that review though, because it is 2,000 odd words long, so it is a lengthy read, and I do kind of outline everything I love about the game there. What I'm going to use this video for instead is to talk about the very critical cultural elements that make up that game. And that kind of gives you a background to why I like it so much, because I am a huge fan of Japanese ghost stories, yurei as such as they're called. I've studied them. I've been to exhibitions in Japan to look at various original paintings of yurei and all that kind of stuff. I've got books on the subject, and it is a passion project of mine. And Project Zero is really the only game out there that does that justice. It's not the only Japanese horror game series, but it really is the only one that has the yurei spirit about it. So, I mean, if you look at the other Japanese horror games, you've got Resident Evil, which has always been about Western horror. It originally was about the B-grade zombies, of course, but it has since expanded into other areas of horror, with the most recent one being Village, having that gothic horror vibe to it with werewolves and vampires and stuff. But it has always been a Western kind of horror. Silent Hill, likewise, has been very Western focused. Again, it is by Japanese developers, or at least it was originally. It became a Western developed series afterwards, but in the initial stages it was a Japanese developed series. But it always took place in Western settings with Western characters and a very Western outlook in terms of the psychology and philosophy that it displayed as well. So those were great games, don't get me wrong. I really love both Resident Evil and Silent Hill. But in terms of Japanese horror and games that are identifiably Japanese horror, because Japanese horror does have a different aesthetic vibe and tone about it, it really has only been Project Zero over the years. And that is one of the reasons that I have loved the series so much. And so what is Uray? What is this core of the Project Zero experience? Because they are ghosts, and if you were going to be very reductionist about it, yurei literally means Japanese ghost. That is kind of the literal meaning of what they are. And certainly when we look at Western artists trying to take the yurei myth and turn it into a Western product, that is how they interpret it. So you look at film in particular, you look at the likes of The Ring and The Grudge. What the directors and film writers of those Western films did was take the original yurei story and turn it into a very Western-style ghost. Sure, they had the Japanese kind of creepiness about them with the long hair and all that kind of awkward movement, the ghostly movement as such, but really they were a Western understanding of a ghost. Yurei is something slightly different, and to me, from the studies I've done of yurei, it's more that they are tragic stories. Yes, they are dangerous to humans because they are ghosts, and ghosts have a habit of touching people with the dead and taking them with them back to the dead. But as dangerous as they can be to humans, there is a tragic story about most yurei. There is a melancholia about it. It's not aggressive, it's not angry, and it's not violent. It's more this kind of, it's almost like an elegant approach to the kind of the horror and the violence that ghosts do. It's not a physical kind of aggressive, flesh-ripping style of horror and violence. It's more this kind of elegant kind of gracefulness about Uray, which is aesthetically different. It's hard to put in words, and I'm kind of stumbling over my words as I talk here, but there is that difference there. And I think perhaps the best way to explain it would be to give you a couple of Uray stories, some of the most famous ones in Japan, and there are elements of these stories in Project Zero. So as you're playing Maiden of Black Water, you will probably notice elements from these particular stories in the way that that game tells its stories and the ghosts that you run into along the way. So perhaps the most famous Uray story of all, the one you're going to come across every single time the minute you start to study the subject, is the story of Okiku. Now, Okiku was one of the three great yurei, and her story it's just a fascinating, fun little story, really. Okiku was a maid that was either killed or she killed herself. It depends on the version that you read or get told. But she died as a result of her breaking or being falsely accused of stealing one of 10 precious heirloom plates. So she had this plate, she either broke it or stole it, and she either got killed or she killed herself. So then she became a ghost, and she tormented the murderer, the person who was responsible for her death, or the person that was responsible for her killing herself, by appearing every night, counting to 9, and then shrieking loudly. So she was eventually put to rest when a priest encountered her and then shouted 10 as soon as Okiku counted to 9. So that's really kind of the story, and the idea is that it's still a scary story, it's still a classic, because Okiku is still looking for that missing plate. So she's based in Hyogo Prefecture, where Himeji Castle is, and she kind of still haunts that area, supposedly, still counting to 9, which is the number of plates left, and still shrieking when she can't find the 10th plate. So that's one of the most famous of all Uray stories. It is scary, of course, and it is a ghost doing things that terrify people, but there's that element of tragedy in there, and there's that element of sadness, and you're meant to feel sympathy for the ghost, not just be scared of her. You're also meant to feel something for her, and that's always the way that the top Uray stories kind of work. The second one that I want to relate to you is actually my personal favourite. I love this story. It's actually not originally a Japanese story, as far as people can tell. It's been taken from Chinese mythology and then adapted into Japanese culture. It's one of those stories that is just... It is just such a timeless classic that it has been appropriated into multiple cultures before that was even a thing, before free information transfer was a real concept. They were still trading this story around. Anyway, Otsuyu was a woman that had a relationship with a very dashing man, and depending on the version of the story that you listen to, they were either separated for a while or they were never able to meet because they had a class difference. They were in love, but they were forced apart. And while they were forced apart, Otsuyu got ill and died. But her partner, her lover, didn't know that. So she came back as a ghost and then proceeded to go to her lover, who apparently had no qualms about why she was suddenly turning up even though they'd been separated for so long. Anyway, she went and they would spend the night together every night. As far as he was aware, she was still this beautiful young woman that he was totally in love with. The problem occurred when a servant saw them in their actual form, which was that of a rotting skeleton. So she appeared beautiful to her lover, but to everybody else she was this undead monster. So what they did, they got the Buddhist priest to help, and they put the little symbols, the ofura, around the house to protect it and ward it from her so she couldn't get in. And she would then spend every night wandering around the house wailing and begging everybody to let her in. Unfortunately for the landlord, the lover, the young man, one of the servants wasn't really clued into this, and then one night let Otsuyu in. What happened was the next morning, they came along, the servants came to the young master's bedchambers, and they discovered that he was dead, with his body kind of wrapped around with Otsuyu. They kind of died together. She was not a vengeful ghost. She was just a ghost in love, really. And again, that's another example. Uray is not just monstrous and horrific. There is an element of beauty in there. And you see that in Project Zero as well. You see this effort to make it all beautiful. It's not just about being frightening. Or perhaps because it is beautiful, it's even more frightening. That's how the Japanese kind of think about these things. The third story isn't as classic as those other two. It's quite modern and it has that urban legend kind of mystique around it. But it is a good one. And it does say something about Project Zero, which I'll get to in a minute. It's set in Iom Cemetery, which is in Tokyo, and it's famous for being one of Tokyo's most haunted spots. During the day, it's just this gorgeous place with lots of cherry blossom trees, and it is actually one of the favourite places in Tokyo to go cherry blossom viewing in that season. But at night time, it becomes very creepy and haunted, and people are convinced that there's ghosts there and stuff. One of the area's best known ghosts is, she's harmless, but she's a woman in white that appears on dark and rainy nights, and she hails taxis to get dropped off back at home. The taxi driver then takes this hitchhiker as such to her place where she wants to go, and when he turns around to collect the fare and, let her go, she's disappeared, and all that's left is a puddle of water on the seat. And of course that's quite creepy. She doesn't do any damage, but she does certainly creep people out because, hey, it's a ghost and stuff. But what's interesting about that one is the association with water. And the thing about yurei is they're a kind of summer thing, because in Japan, the summers are blisteringly hot. Like, they are brutal. It's not just that it's hot temperatures, the humidity is right up there. And you step outside during a Japanese summer and you're immediately drenched in sweat. Because of that, the horror industry in Japan kind of rose up around the summer. And it's, in particular, during summer, there are a lot of haunted houses that pop up. Those kinds of fairground attractions where you go in and all these things spook you and you have a good time. The idea is that by being chilled by these ghostly encounters or these horrific experiences, you lose a little bit of the heat. The edge of the heat is kind of taken off by being chilled to your bones. So there is that association between water and yurei in Japan, and I think it comes from the humid of the summer, plus the idea that, water can be a chilling thing. You get a bit scared and the water cools down and your whole body calms down. At least that's the psychology behind it. So Project Zero, Maiden of Black Water, has that association with water as well, and I think that is quite deliberate. And it is, of course, quite common to a lot of Japanese ghost stories that there is that association between water and the horrible things that are going on. So in the future, when you're playing Japanese games or you're reading Japanese horror books or watching Japanese horror movies, look out for water. You'll probably find that it is a pretty common recurring motif. So anyway, those are three stories of yurei that kind of highlight what I'm talking about with Project Zero. It's not just about monsters, and it's not just about aggression, and it's not just about raw violence. Japanese ghost stories are about this tragic story, and you feel sympathy and fear in equal measures for the ghost. You want them to be okay. You want to help them with this, take the step into the next world, but at the same time, and you certainly sympathize with what has happened to them, but at the same time, you of course have the mortal fear for yourself. It is a different aesthetic and it is a different tone, and I think that's part of the reason that Project Zero has struggled in comparison to Resident Evil and Silent Hill. Those games, in tapping into the Western psyche a bit better, have had a more global appeal, whereas Project Zero is a little bit more Asian exclusive. It's certainly not just Japan that sees ghosts this way. I'd say that China and Korea have similar views on ghosts from what little I've seen, but it's a more Asian view, and because it is a more localized understanding of horror, the games don't quite have the same global impact. That's my off the top of my head thoughts anyway. Do let me know your own thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. I'd love to hear from people who are fans of Project Zero. Do let me know what you like about the series. Do let me know your favourite. Let's have a good chat about Project Zero, and I apologise as a car drives by and makes a lot of noise there. Once again, do let me know what you think about Project Zero. This is my favourite horror series and I do like to talk about it, so let's have a good chat. Do mash that like and subscribe button if you enjoy the work that I do. That way you won't miss a video as I upload them. And if you want to support what I'm doing at digitallydownloaded.net, both across the YouTube channel and the website, you can support me for $1 a month on Patreon. You can do more if you'd like, and I'd certainly appreciate that too, but you can back me from as little as $1 a month over there. And in return for your subscription as such, you do get a 48-page monthly magazine, which goes in depth into various things about Japanese culture. We talk about the history, we talk about the music, the food, the drinks, the film, the literature, and of course the games. So if you're interested in knowing more about the background to a lot of this stuff that you see in Japanese video games, just back me on Patreon and get that magazine. Alright, well, I think that's enough for this video. It's gone on quite long. I do have another one with Project Zero on a very different topic, so you are going to be inundated with Project Zero content today. But bear with me, I've got to get this out of my system, and then we'll be back to talking about other non-horror things as well tomorrow. All right, have a good day, everyone. We'll see you at the next one.